My neighbor knocked on my door at 6:47 in the morning on a Tuesday and told me my son-in-law had been stealing from me for 2 years, not borrowing, not mismanaging, stealing, systematically, with a spreadsheet. I know that last part because she had printed it out and was holding it in both hands when I opened the door in my bathrobe. "Come inside," I told her, and she did. And by the time she finished explaining what she'd found, I had to sit down on the kitchen floor because my legs simply stopped working. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is right now, because it's 6:47 on a Tuesday morning in Houston, Texas. I thought my biggest problem that day was going to be a slow drain in my guest bathroom. I had no idea I was about to discover that the man my daughter had married 3 years earlier had been quietly dismantling everything I'd spent 4 decades building. My name is Everett. I'm 64 years old. I worked as a civil engineer for the city of Houston for 31 years before I retired, and in the years before that retirement, I'd done what a lot of men my age did when they finally had time and a little money saved. I invested. Not wildly. Not in things I didn't understand. I bought rental properties in the Third Ward and in Pearland. I bought into a small commercial strip in Pasadena. I kept meticulous records the way engineers do because if there's one thing 31 years of municipal infrastructure teaches you, it's that sloppy numbers cost lives. I had a portfolio worth a little over $1.4 million when I retired. Not generational wealth by any stretch, but enough. Enough to live on. Enough to eventually leave something behind for my daughter and for whatever grandchildren God saw fit to send me. My wife, Hattie, passed 6 years ago from pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to burial. That's how fast it moved. She was 57. She never got to see our daughter get married, never got to meet the man she chose, and some days I think that's a mercy because Hattie could read a person the way I read blueprints. She would have seen him clearly the first time he sat at our table. My daughter married her husband 3 years ago. She was 29. She'd met him through work. He was charming in that effortless way that makes you want to trust someone before you've earned the right to. He had an answer for everything. He laughed at the right moments. He shook my hand firmly. He called me sir for the first 6 months and then transitioned to a comfortable first-name basis in a way that felt natural at the time. My daughter was happy, genuinely happy. And I want you to understand that when I say I had reservations, they were the quiet kind. The kind you don't say out loud because your child is glowing and you don't want to be the reason that stops. My reservations sounded like this. He talks about money in a way that's a little too comfortable. He asks questions that are more specific than curious. He remembered the exact square footage of my Pearland duplex 6 weeks after I mentioned it once, casually at dinner. I told myself I was being a protective father. I told myself any man would seem insufficient next to a daughter you raised alone for 6 years after her mother died. I told myself I was projecting. I should have trusted the blueprints. 14 months after the wedding, my daughter and her husband moved into my house. It was meant to be temporary. He'd left his corporate job to start a consulting firm, and the startup costs were eating into their savings. My daughter asked if they could stay for a few months until the business found its footing. Of course, I said yes. That's what fathers do. I converted the upstairs into their space. I gave them privacy. I kept to my routines. And slowly, so slowly I didn't see it happening, he began inserting himself into my finances. It started reasonably. He noticed I was still managing all my rental properties through a spreadsheet I'd built myself in 2009. Outdated, he said. Inefficient. Let me set you up with something better, he said. He's good with technology, my daughter told me. He can save you so much time, and he did set me up with something better. A property management platform, clean interface, automated rent collection. He walked me through it. He seemed genuinely helpful. What I didn't notice was that when he created my account, he created himself as a co-administrator. I didn't notice because I didn't look, because I trusted my daughter's husband the way you trust someone in your own home. Because I am not, and have never been, a suspicious man. Over the following months, he offered to handle the communication with my tenants, because I'd mentioned it was the part of landlording I found most draining. He offered to review my lease renewals. He offered to coordinate with my property manager on the commercial strip. Each offer was reasonable. Each offer saved me time. Each offer moved him one step further inside my financial life. And the whole time, he was approachable and helpful and present. And my daughter seemed happier than she'd been in years. And what was I supposed to do with that? What I didn't know is what my neighbor figured out. Her name is Nola. She's 71, a retired accountant, and she has lived next door to me for 19 years. She and Hattie used to sit on the back porch on Friday evenings and argue about everything from city politics to which grocery store had the best greens. After Hattie died, Nola kept showing up. She brought food for about a year and a half. She never made it awkward. She just kept showing up. When my daughter and her husband moved in, Nola watched him the way Hattie would have watched him, which is to say carefully and without comment until she had something worth saying. Nola had a nephew who worked at a title company. 3 weeks before she knocked on my door, her nephew had flagged something unusual. A transfer of deed inquiry on one of my Pureland properties. Not a completed transfer, an inquiry. Someone had submitted paperwork to explore the process of transferring the deed into a jointly held LLC. The LLC had 2 members. My name was one of them. My son-in-law's name was the other. I had not agreed to this. I had not signed anything. I had not formed any LLC with my son-in-law or with anyone, and yet there the paperwork sat, in process. Nola's nephew called her because he remembered meeting me at a cookout 2 summers ago, and he didn't feel right just letting it pass. When she finished explaining all of this at my kitchen table, I looked at the printed spreadsheet in her hands. She laid it flat on the table. It was a document she'd found online, attached to the LLC registration in the county database. It was a list of assets, my assets, all of them, with estimated values, with notes about which ones were easiest to transfer, with a column marked status that had entries like in progress and pending signature, and next to my Pasadena commercial property, the words target Q3. I sat with that paper for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and I called my attorney. Her name is Frederica. She's been my attorney since 2003. She's the kind of woman who does not waste words or time. And when I described what Nola had shown me, she said 2 things. First, don't touch anything. Don't log into any of the accounts. Don't access the property management platform. Don't confront him. Don't tell your daughter yet. Second, I'm calling someone I know at the DA's office Financial Crimes Unit. This is not a civil matter, Everett. This is criminal fraud in progress. Don't tell my daughter. That instruction sat in my chest like a rock. My daughter was upstairs in my house. Her husband was upstairs in my house. And I was supposed to sit at my kitchen table and look at this spreadsheet and feel nothing and say nothing. I did it. I don't know how, but I did it. That afternoon I found an excuse to leave. I told them I was having lunch with an old colleague. Instead, I drove to Frederica's office and sat across from her and a man named Agent Dillard from the State Financial Crimes Division, and I told them everything I could remember, every conversation about money, every offer to help, every moment I'd thought nothing of it. Agent Dillard was methodical. He asked me to walk back through the timeline of when my son-in-law had gained access to various parts of my financial life. He pulled out a legal pad and wrote dates. He asked about the property management platform, and when I gave him the name of it, something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, recognition. You're not the first person who's come in here with that platform in the picture, he said. He told me what they believed had happened. The platform had a known vulnerability that had been exploited in at least 4 other cases across Texas and Louisiana. A co-administrator with the right access level could redirect rent payments to an alternate account, could initiate lease modifications, could authorize maintenance disbursements, and if the primary account holder wasn't checking carefully, which most older landlords who adopted the platform to simplify their lives were not, the misdirection could continue for months before anyone noticed. They believed my son-in-law had been redirecting a portion of my rent collections to a secondary account in his name for approximately 22 months. The total, based on the preliminary figures Frederica had pulled from my actual bank statements, was somewhere between $94,000 and $110,000. My hands didn't shake this time. I think I had run out of the capacity to be surprised. I just sat there looking at those numbers and thinking about Hattie, about how I kept those properties going for her, about how they were supposed to become something for our daughter, and how the man our daughter had brought into our family had been quietly bleeding them for almost 2 years. There was more. The LLC paperwork was real and partially executed. He'd gotten as far as the initial filing using what appeared to be a digitized version of my signature. Frederica believed it had been lifted from a document I'd signed in his presence, possibly a lease renewal or a maintenance authorization I'd countersigned without reading every line the way I should have. He hadn't completed the transfer yet. The title company flag had come early enough, but his notes, the ones on that spreadsheet, suggested he'd planned to move 2 of the Pearland properties into the LLC by the end of the 3rd quarter, at which point he would have been a legal co-owner with the ability to sell or refinance without my consent. Agent Dillard asked me about my daughter. I told him what I knew. I told him she was warm and trusting and had married this man because she loved him, and I had no reason to believe she knew anything about this. I also told him that I wasn't certain, and I needed to be honest about that uncertainty, because the worst version of this story was one I couldn't let myself think about clearly and still stay in that chair. Dillard nodded. We're going to meet to verify her involvement or non-involvement before we move on this, he said. We'd like to monitor the platform activity in his communications for 2 weeks. Can you continue as normal? I thought about what normal looked like. Dinner at the same table. Good morning in the kitchen. His hand on my daughter's back. Can you pass the salt, Everett? 2 weeks, I said. Whatever it takes. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life since the 11 weeks with Hattie. I became a man I didn't recognize. I smiled when he made jokes. I talked about the Astros with him over coffee. I asked him how the consulting firm was coming along and listened to his answer with a face that showed nothing. Meanwhile, Agent Dillard's team had obtained a warrant for his financial records and communications. They'd verified the secondary account. They'd traced the digital signature to a document he'd watched me sign 15 months ago. They'd confirmed that 3 of his consulting firms' listed clients did not appear to exist. And they'd confirmed my daughter didn't know. The way they determined it was quiet and thorough. And when Frederica called me to tell me that nothing in my daughter's communications or financial history showed any connection to what he'd been doing, I sat down in my truck in a parking garage and cried for about 10 minutes. Not because she was innocent. Because she was going to have to know. Because the man she'd chosen had made her an unknowing piece of a plan she would never have agreed to. Because she was going to have to grieve something real. I went home that evening, and she was making dinner, and he was sitting at my kitchen island talking about a property he'd read about in Katy that he thought might be a good investment for me. I stood in the doorway and looked at him, really looked at him, and I thought about all the times I'd questioned my own instincts about this man, all the times I'd told myself I was being unfair. I wasn't unfair. I was right. And I'd overridden myself anyway. On a Friday evening, 2 weeks and 1 day after Nola knocked on my door, Agent Dillard and 2 other officers came to my home. Frederica was already inside. I had asked my daughter to come downstairs for dinner. Told her I had something I needed to discuss with both of them. He came down first, relaxed, hands in his pockets. He saw Frederica and his face changed, just slightly, just for a second, the way a light flickers before it goes out. Then the door opened. My daughter stood on the bottom step of the staircase and watched Agent Dillard explain why they were there. She looked at her husband, she looked at me, she looked at the documents Frederica had placed on the dining table, the LLC paperwork with the forged signature, the bank records, the redirected rent payments. She sat down on the step. She didn't say anything for a long time. Her husband tried. He said it was a misunderstanding. He said the LLC was meant to protect my assets, not steal them. He said the account was for operational expenses he'd intended to document. He said he'd been meaning to tell me. He said a lot of things, and each thing he said landed in the room and died there because none of it had any weight. My daughter looked at him. "Is it true?" she asked. He started explaining again. "Is it true?" she said again, quieter. He stopped talking. She stood up from the step. She was wearing a blue shirt Hattie would have loved on her. She walked past me to the dining table, and she picked up the spreadsheet, the one with the column that said Target Q3, next to my Pasadena property, and she read it. She read the whole thing standing up at the table without saying a word. Then she set it down. She turned to Agent Dillard. "Take him," she said. They did. I have been a father for 34 years, and I have watched my daughter face hard things. I watched her sit with her mother at the end when I couldn't keep my composure in the room. I watched her give the eulogy at Hattie's funeral and not break until she stepped back from the podium. She has always been steadier than me. That night was no different. She cried, but not the way I expected. She cried the way you cry when you understand something fully, not when you're still in shock. We sat at that kitchen table until almost midnight. I told her everything, all of it, the timeline, the amounts, the LLC, the forged signature. I told her about the 2 weeks I'd spent pretending nothing was wrong. I told her I was sorry I hadn't seen it sooner. She was quiet for a moment. "You saw it, Dad," she said. "You just didn't know what you were seeing." That hit me somewhere I didn't expect. I asked her if she'd had any sense of it, any feeling that something was off. She thought about that seriously, the way her mother used to think before answering something important. "There were things," she said, "questions he'd ask about your properties that I thought were just him being interested. Times he'd come back from your office and I'd ask what you talked about and he'd say nothing much in a way that felt like nothing much. I told myself I was being paranoid." She paused. "I guess we were both telling ourselves that." "Yes," I said. "I guess we were." She filed for divorce the following month. He was charged with elder financial fraud, forgery, and wire fraud. The case moved through the system over the next 8 months. His attorney attempted to argue that my son-in-law had been acting in my financial interest, and that any account irregularities were the result of poor documentation rather than intent. The jury saw the spreadsheet. They heard the testimony about the forged signature. They saw the LLC paperwork. They deliberated for 6 hours. He was convicted on all 3 counts. The judge sentenced him to 7 years. The court also ordered restitution. I don't know if I'll ever see all of it, but that wasn't the point. My daughter moved into a small house about 20 minutes from me. She is doing what people do after something like this. She goes to work. She sees her friends. She comes to my house on Sundays, and we cook together the way I used to cook with Hattie. And sometimes she cries a little, and sometimes she doesn't. And I don't press either way. She's going to be all right. I know this because she is her mother's daughter, and her mother was built for the long haul. Nola came to the sentencing. She sat 2 rows behind me and patted my arm on the way out. That's all. No speech, just the pat. 19 years of neighbor. That's what it looks like. I want to say something about trust, because this story isn't really about money. The money matters. Don't misunderstand me. $94,000 that my wife and I built together, that I managed carefully for 30 years, that I intended for my daughter, it matters. But the thing that almost destroyed me wasn't the theft. It was the override. The moment I noticed something and then talked myself out of it. Not once, dozens of times. I have spent my entire career reading structural problems before they become failures. I know what it looks like when something that appears solid is actually compromised underneath. I knew how to read people like I read blueprints. And then I handed that skill over to someone who'd charmed my daughter, and I stopped using it. Here is what I will tell you, and I mean this for anyone watching who is in the season of life where people call you a retiree and assume that means you've stepped back from paying close attention. Do not step back. Pay closer attention than ever, Because the people who prey on our generation are counting on the idea that we've earned enough comfort to stop noticing. They are counting on our love for our children to quiet our instincts about the people our children bring home. They are patient. They are organized. They have spreadsheets. Trust the instinct, not the charm. If something feels like a question you should have asked, go back and ask it. If someone has more access to your life than they've earned, you are allowed to take it back. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to apologize for it. You built what you built, and you get to decide who stands close to it. My daughter is coming over this Sunday. She's bringing sweet potato bread from the bakery she likes on Westheimer. I'm making her mother's smothered chicken, the recipe I had to call Hattie's sister 3 times to get right. We're going to sit at the same kitchen table where this whole thing unraveled, and we're going to have a good meal together, and we're going to have a good meal together, and we're going to be fine. Not because nothing happened, but because we're still here, and that's enough.